filthy swines, get in here, sit down and behave yourselves. We're going to read some news. Often here, AI is a weapon, and the definitions of weapons that we've seen in the past have all been explicitly violent and high impact, high velocity, death bringing activities. Violence nowadays, particularly from the progressive types, is often cast as anything that is going to make someone feel unsafe. But AI as a weapon is much more mysterious and difficult to pick apart because the whole point of AI is it's extra super smart and potentially, eventually, smarter than us. So, what is the scope of AI weaponry? How do we deal with this? Which we'll see on this article from The Verge, written by Hayden Field. AI warfare is already here. Anthropic's fight with the Pentagon highlights the risk of autonomous warfare, but obscures just how close it is. So this is the thing. Are you talking about AI-controlled weapons, maybe aircraft, tanks, and such? No, weapons could also be AI-generated disinformation. There's an awful lot of potential for misleading mass groups of people using AI. Anyway, let's read this. The Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, an international forum that focuses on lethal autonomous systems, is hosted twice a year at the United Nations in Geneva. When Branka Maharajan attended in November 2017, she thought the 5-day sessions, which dealt largely in hypotheticals, speculating on a world where warfare was fought with killer robots, would be business as usual. After all, this was technology some thought might never be developed and likely never deployed. That year, she quickly realized was different. That distant, imagined future was suddenly closer and realer than ever. On the first day, some attendees watched a short film called Slaughter Bots, put together by the Future of Life Institute. The video featured a fictional defense contractor pitching an AI-powered drone that could kill unassisted with precision strikes. They used to say guns don't kill people, people do. Its CEO tells the audience, but people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make their decisions. The mood in the room, Maharajan recalls, suddenly turned apprehensive. The most frightening part wasn't the premise. It was that the Pentagon was already developing a version of this technology. I imagine it's already out there. I think I've seen that video, and it is pretty crazy. And we certainly have the technology for it. I think what you're referring to is a fictional demonstration of small drones that would target specific people based upon their facial recognition and shoot them in the head, which is pretty scary. Imagine having a balloon fly across the country with hundreds of thousands of these things, and it just spills them out over a populated area, and these little things go down and do damage to specific people, perhaps. That's something to think about. That'll keep you snug in bed at night. That meeting was the first one held after the start of Project Maven, the US Department of Defense initiative using AI to analyze drone surveillance footage. And by late 2017, Maven had a major tech company on board, Google. The systems we're talking about were not futuristic, says Maharajan, who was a senior researcher at Project Plowshares, a peace-focused independent research institute. There were existing platforms that had degrees of autonomy in them, or the capability to select and engage targets based on sensor data and sensor input. What's the difference between sensor data and sensor input? Is that not a redundant sentence there? The world had already seen drone warfare, deadly machines directed by humans. Now it was looking at a future where humans may be removed from the loop entirely. These were not these Terminator-like figures that we were concerned about, but really what was happening with the enablement of autonomy, says Maharajan. Nearly a decade later, militaries haven't yet developed fully autonomous lethal weapons that we know of. I imagine there's all sorts of research going on regarding AI-controlled weapons, but they're not going to tell you about it, are they? I think our media has groomed many of us to believe that they're in the loop on what's going on the most important issues in the world, then I don't think we are necessarily. I think there is a lot of information withheld, and rightly so, probably. That these systems sit squarely in the center of a recent high stakes battle between the US government and AI startup Anthropic. Anthropic is seeking to preserve two red lines: bans on domestic mass surveillance and on weapons that can identify, track, and kill targets with zero human involvement. Well, I think mass surveillance domestically is a given. It's everywhere. There are cameras everywhere. Data's being hoovered up by commercial companies and then sold to intelligence agencies. So I don't know how you're going to put that genie back in the bottle. It's here. It's probably here to stay. Since the start of the year, it's emerged as the only military AI contractor to place meaningful limits on what experts call one of the final frontiers of AI warfare. But amid shifting alliances, lawsuits, and melodrama, it's easy to lose sight of the larger context that AI is, and long has been, deeply embedded in the military. 70 years ago, a summer meeting between scientists in New Hampshire made the Department of Defense sit up and take notice of AI's potential for war. Since then, its influence has grown exponentially every decade. In recent years in particular, AI has enabled more and faster killings than ever before. What happened 70 years ago? There was no AI 70 years ago. What are we talking about there? That's a bit of a vague statement there. What happened 70 years ago? Even Anthropic seems to think its red lines won't hold for long. After all, history has proven otherwise. The US military has backed AI development for decades, and in turn, AI has transformed warfare. In the 2000s, the technology became capable of parsing unprecedented amounts of data collected worldwide, creating a surveillance revolution. And the late 2010s saw the development of advanced facial recognition and other sophisticated machine vision systems. I don't really see anything before maybe 2010 or 2015 as being AI, really. It's just very clever algorithms, which I suppose is AI, but the magnitude of the complexity is way higher, obviously, now with these large language models. The fight between Anthropic and the Pentagon has drawn attention to the growing power of these systems. It began in January 2026 when the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth demanded a renegotiation of the DoD's existing AI contracts. The terms did away with any grey areas or previously agreed upon terms, allowing the Pentagon to use the company's technology within the vague and expansive limits of any lawful use. Anthropic, the only AI company approved to deploy its tech on the Pentagon's classified networks at that point, objected. A contractor like Anthropic's setting limits on specific uses of its tech is unusual. It's not government-created technology in the way that the Manhattan Project was, nor a conventional military supplier like Northrop Grumman, said Andrew Reddy, an associate research professor of public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. This is one of the pain points that's made clear when you've got this startup ecosystem engaging with the Pentagon directly. Even within Silicon Valley, he said, there's a lot of disagreement over what limits should be set. It's also unclear who will win. As a negotiation tactic, the DoD designated Anthropic a military supply chain risk in March, and President Donald Trump declared he was banning all government agencies from using its Claude system. Well, they must have had a reason to do that. I'm imagining it's more than a negotiating tactic, because there are competitors out there. So if Anthropic weren't performing what the DoD was requesting, then I guess they're opening up to other suppliers, maybe? Perhaps not so dark as it's been cast there. The relationship has apparently warmed somewhat since then, with the release of Anthropic's cybersecurity-focused model Mythos, but a court battle is still playing out. Anthropic declined to provide a comment for this story. Either way, the debate has brought fully autonomous weapons into the public lexicon in a new way. But AI's creeping influence in military operation hasn't slowed down in decades. We've kind of crossed the Rubicon while we pretend that we haven't, Reddy said. At the center of the debate is DoD Directive 3000.09, one of the only policies governing the use of lethal autonomous weapons. Originally written in 2012, it defines such a system as one that, once activated, can select and engage targets without further intervention by an operator. And it decrees that both fully autonomous and semi-autonomous weapons be designed to allow humans to exercise appropriate levels of judgment over the use of force. The directive set up the first policy on the use of autonomy in warfare, said Hamza Chowdhury, who leads AI and national security at the Future of Life Institute. Depending on how you interpret the definition, however, certain missile defense programs may have crossed that line decades ago. Take the Phalanx CIWS, for instance. It's an automated weapon system resembling a very large gun. Sounds nice. Built to defend naval vessels from incoming missile attacks. That type of system wouldn't work if there were a human in the loop, since it has to respond in milliseconds. I wonder if the Golden Dome is also an example of that. The one that Israel uses and the one that I think we supplied. Similar systems I think we're intending on using in Greenland, if possible. Don't know what's happening there. The difference, some experts say, is that these systems operate solely in a defense-only fixed environment. They're engaging, this interpretation goes, but not deciding, just reacting to an incoming threat. The "and" is doing a lot of work inside of that statute. We have systems that can decide and systems that can engage, but you can't have a system that does both, Betty said. Even without full autonomy, AI compresses kill chains to mere seconds so that humans are not actually making the assessment that international humanitarian law requires to prevent civilian harm, said Maddie Batt, a legal fellow at Tech Justice Law. When humans' failure to do that results in civilian death, it is a war crime. The definition between offensive and defensive, too, is fuzzy. One of my favorite exercises with my students is putting up a military technology and then asking, is this defensive or offensive? Reddy said, pointing to the example of a nuclear weapon in a silo, which some would argue is defensive because it is being used to deter, and some would argue it's offensive because it is designed to hit foreign targets. It could be domestic targets, maybe. I don't know. You could shoot them at an asteroid. Just because its primary function is defensive in nature doesn't mean the technology itself is defensive in nature. My brain broke. You just contradicted yourself there. Basically, it can be defensive and offensive. That's the point of a weapon. You know, all weapons are like that. You can defend yourself with them or you can attack someone. Obviously, yes. Sorim Adam-Mate, a professor at Purdue University, was blunter. You cannot fight a war only in defense. In 2023, the government's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer, CDAO, which is the central hub of all of the DoD's AI operations, issued an update to DoD Directive 3000.09, but it didn't solve the document's core ambiguities. In 2024, the Biden administration published a memorandum on AI and national security, setting up rules for how AI can be used in certain national security scenarios. And for now, even under Trump, that policy is in force. The Pentagon has seen significant upheaval. The CDAO is currently undergoing a significant restructuring that makes it more isolated from the rest of the DoD, and the office now reports that Emil Michael, who is both the DoD's Undersecretary of Research and Engineering and the department's CTO. International efforts such as the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, it's a bit of a clumsy name for a group, and the campaign to stop killer robots, that sounds very clear, haven't been able to make much progress either. Marajan told The Verge that though the CCW has greatly helped smaller countries to understand the landscape around AI warfare, progress overall has been very slow and we haven't seen concrete agreement, particularly among the major countries and more sophisticated militaries. Though some countries have expressed interest in a ban on lethal autonomous weapons, there's not even an official international definition of the term. The situation often results in a lot of people talking past each other, and some countries find the lack of a binding instrument to be their advantage. The heck is a binding instrument? What are you talking about? Said Sarah Schocker, a senior researcher scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, and former lead of OpenAI's geopolitics team. I think most people, policymakers, civil society members who attend these meetings are likely tired. Schocker added, it's been over a decade and there is really no agreement. Whatever the status of autonomous weapons before 2017 may even accelerated their timeline dramatically and changed the terms of the debate. The program marked the first time the idyllic "don't be evil" Silicon Valley of the 2010s was obviously involved in warfare, forcing Google employees and the public to react. That was the first national conversation we had about the role of AI technologies in military operations, says Mate. Project Maven began with a memo from Robert Work, then Deputy Defense Secretary. He established an algorithmic warfare cross-functional team, tasked with training AI algorithms that could be deployed to war zones, maybe even by year end. Google was soon awarded the contract. Internal resistance grew quickly. In April 2018, about 4,000 employees signed a petition demanding that Google remove itself from the business of war. The problem is Google is humongous, and their influence touches all sorts of technology. It would be like saying remove Microsoft or remove Apple or remove Linux from these systems. They're going to be everywhere. They're in civilian systems, and obviously those are targets that could be hijacked for military purposes. So obviously these companies need to have some cooperation with state defense. The letter said a Google executive had assured Googlers their tech will not operate or fly drones and will not be used to launch weapons. But while this eliminates a narrow set of direct applications, the technology is being built for the military, and once it's delivered, it could easily be used to assist in these tasks. The employees said, "We cannot outsource the moral responsibility of our technologies to third parties." Google did not respond to a request for comment for this story. Recently, MSS has reportedly been integral to both the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and the US strikes on Iran, which have reportedly killed thousands to date in the region. Google employees argued their company should take a stand, and it did, choosing not to renew its contract amid the controversy in mid-2018. But Amazon and Microsoft quickly swooped in to pick up tens of millions of dollars in contracts for the same work. Exactly, the same thing has happened to Anthropic because of their stance. They've just gone elsewhere, I imagine. Palantir soon took over, and Project Maven became the Maven Smart System, MSS, which not only allows for object detection and tracking, but also analyzing surveillance data on a large scale. Claude is intertwined with MSS2, albeit in a more limited capacity. After Anthropic began allowing military use of its technology in 2024, its Claude chatbot was added to the user interface, helping analysts query the system about certain geographical areas and types of intelligence or target. Even this relatively minor addition, some experts say, has made the system more efficient. As a result, Claude enabled targeting, potentially striking many more individuals. The sheer volume of targets could make meaningful human supervision difficult, said Shocker. What we know about MSS is that it reduces the number of human beings in the targeting cycle, and that's actually by design. While Anthropic might have been alright reducing human intervention, it's pushed back against setting it to zero. As Google found with Project Maven, though, competitors are more than willing to fill the gap. It does seem a bit scary to think that all war could be fought by decisions meted out by AI. And that's the problem with this race to the top of AI. The most competitive position is one where you remove humans from as much of the loop as possible, because AI is obviously faster. But at the same time, you're removing humanity from the most dangerous part of humanity. You're automating weapons that may turn on us, maybe. Other AI companies have jumped at the chance to work with the Pentagon. Even before its fight with Anthropic began, several major AI labs had loosened their operating guidelines or tweaked their mission statements to allow for military deals, including Google, OpenAI, and arguably Anthropic itself. OpenAI quickly signed on to the terms Anthropic had spurned. And in the months after snubbing Anthropic, the Department of Defense signed deals with 8 companies to deploy their AI on classified networks. Google, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, NVIDIA, OpenAI, Reflection, Oracle, and SpaceX. Shocker said that while working at OpenAI was one of the sector's biggest players, she didn't interact with many people studying the risk of decision support systems or autonomous weapon systems. The research community in those areas is still extremely siloed, she said. People in this space have been warning and researching about those risks for a while, Shocker said. adding, "The problem is that these people were not in the labs." OpenAI did not respond to a request for comment. Internally, employees have voiced dissent in ways that strongly echo the pushback against Project Maven almost a decade ago. Externally, OpenAI's Pentagon deal sparked widespread controversy, leading CEO Sam Altman to announce he was attempting to renegotiate the deal. But Silicon Valley executives are aggressively pushing back against employee organizing and speaking out, including by using AI to identify leakers. And many tech workers already fear for their jobs in an era where AI is set to replace entry-level roles at their own firms. Meanwhile, through its court fight with the Trump administration, Anthropic is still trying to regain its position as a military and intelligence contractor. Its technology has been deeply enmeshed in the DoD operation since 2024, and last summer it introduced Claude Gov, a product designed specifically for use by national security agencies with loosened guardrails around classified materials. Anthropic is risking a high-stakes loss as it reportedly prepares an IPO this year. It's reportedly in talks with investors to raise funding at a $900 billion valuation. There's more investor pressure for the lab to turn a profit than ever before. That's almost $1 trillion. That's an awful lot. In recent months, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei has held firm on mass surveillance for Americans, but he's demonstrated no problem with and in fact expressed his support for such surveillance for everyone else. Anthropic's very narrow red lines do not go far enough to protect human rights or comply with international laws, said Tech Justice Law's BAT. Anthropic specifically talks about mass domestic surveillance of US persons as posing grave civil liberty concerns, but the same civil liberty concerns apply with equal force to non-US persons, she added. They do, but we are a nation and our laws apply to US nationals. So that is the point there. I know perhaps that you've missed that point and you're not maybe interested in the point that these are US companies supplying services to the Department of Defense, which is a US defense organization. So yes, the laws have to apply to US citizens and I guess not to non-US citizens. In fact, we should probably be especially concerned, given the brutal immigration crackdown, about advanced capabilities for mass surveillance of non-citizens. I don't agree. But I would like to see a world where citizens spied upon quite so much, maybe. And that doesn't even cover ethics of mass surveillance abroad, an issue that is strikingly absent from most ethics conversations happening stateside. Right, there are spy agencies in every country, they're spying on all other countries, every country's doing it to every other country, so I don't exactly know what you're going to do about that. They'll do it to us, we'll do it to them, let's hope it's peaceful. And while Amodei believes Anthropic systems aren't ready to support fully autonomous weapons, he's not conceptually or morally opposed to them. In a blog post, he said that fully autonomous weapons, those that take humans out of the loop entirely, and automate selecting and engaging targets, may prove critical for our national defense. Amodei even said he was happy to work directly with the Department of War and on R&D to improve the reliability of these systems and speed up the timeline for the company's help in deploying them. That position, Tech Justice Law's BAT said, is fundamentally in tension with international humanitarian law, which requires case-by-case assessment of any given attack. The adoption of AI into these targeting processes is really based on a speed wins ethos, she said. Regardless of when in the process humans are looped in, if the goal of implementing these systems is to transform something that took weeks or days into seconds, humans are not meaningfully making that assessment for themselves. I thought the concern was more about autonomous systems pulling the trigger, making decisions that would have otherwise taken weeks and compressing them down to seconds. What kind of decisions are those? We're talking tactical decisions, I suppose, which then have to be acted upon by people, maybe? I don't know. That isn't what I expected there. When Hegseth announced his intent to redraft the Pentagon's AI contracts, he explicitly stated that the DoD must accept that the risks of moving fast enough outweigh the risks of imperfect alignment, and that a significant amount of testing and evaluation must be done away with. Yes, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Past administrations have sought to remove purely bureaucratic layers of warfare while preserving safety, Chowdhury says, but the Hegseth memo explicitly sets up a trade-off and says that we favor speed. This isn't typically the best blanket approach when it comes to military operations, experts say, but it is often the deadliest. AI has already enabled that lethality, and it's poised to go even further. Since Hegseth's memo says, Marajan, more countries are paying attention to the risks of autonomous warfare, but against the American military and its partners in Silicon Valley, it's not clear how much they can do. Right now, they're simply trying to understand its implications. If humans are just rubber stamping decisions, Marajan said, what are the lines of accountability there and what does the liability look like? During a Defense One Tech Summit in 2017, when Maven was centered as the future of the department, the chief of the algorithmic warfare cross-functional team presented to an audience. AI, he said, would not be selecting a target in combat anytime soon. But now, without intervention, that moment isn't far off. So we're talking about AI controlling what seem relatively conventional weapons, but can we imagine other weapons that AI could perhaps contribute to that are not being discussed in this article, which is very well written. Thank you very much, the author of this article, whose name is Hayden Field. Thank you, Hayden. I mean, AI can be used for all sorts of research endeavors. I imagine could be used to design biological weapons, could be used to influence mass groups of people to do things. There are ways of weaponizing populations of people. So I'm not sure that this article or these concerns are strictly my concerns. I'm not so worried about killer drones dropping down from the sky because, you know, the way to counteract that would be other defenses, other AI controlled defenses. There are anti-drone weapons out there. It could be AI based. It's an escalation for sure. It's not a good thing, but there are, in my opinion, bigger concerns when it comes to AI being used to research weapons that people on our own wouldn't be able to fathom. There's more going on in that field, I think, that's concerning to me than AI-driven drones and guns and stuff. That's kind of old warfare, in my opinion. I think mass control of populations and biological weapons is a much more pressing threat than killer drones, in my opinion. But that is it for now. Make sure you hit that like button if you indeed like me. Follow me wherever you find me. And the only thing I have left to say is Pigwig out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oink, oink, ree, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squee. Oink, 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 squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squee, squeal, ree, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, 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 squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, 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 squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Squeal, squeal. Snort, snuffle, oink, ree, squeal, ree, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree,